Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate each of the witnesses for being here. It's a very, very interesting hearing, and appreciate the chair for convening this hearing. So one of the many things I'm worried about is the de facto gray area between misinformation and disinformation, despite the seemingly clear definitional difference between these concepts. While disinformation may be defined in terms of the malicious intent on the part of the sender, such intent as we've seen today can at times be very difficult to identify. And then on top of that, we need to make sure the gatekeepers themselves trying to police content are objective enough to identify potential misinformation and able to do so as expeditiously as possible. It seems to me that even if we have the technological anti-disinformation tools that we've learned about in this discussion and that we anticipate seeing developed over time, human judgment will always be a key component of any anti-deepfakes effort, and human judgment can, of course, be fallible. In short, the difficulties and nuances of the battle pile up the deeper we delve into this topic. Maybe that's why I find it so interesting to hear what you all have to say today. But I want to just get back to something, and I would say I feel like we've been doing what I would call an endogenous look, and that is, what's the technology here? And you mentioned it, Dr. Farid, in item 4 on page 4 of your recommendations in your written report. But it really gets to what I think is a real-world problem, and I'd like all of you to respond to. And the last questioner just kind of touched on it a bit as well. What do you tell a 13 or 14-year-old that you're trying to warn of potential disinformation, misinformation? How do you do it as a parent, as a grandparent, as someone who cares for, loves for an individual? I mean, that really becomes a part of the equation as much as anything else on the technological side.
Well, thank you for asking the question. Because the nature of my work, I usually show a lot of fake videos to my 12-year daughter. And she actually grew the habit of distrust any video I showed to her. So I think this may be a very effective way to actually tell them, just show them that the existence of fake videos will make them aware that those are something they should be careful about. Yep.
I can take the question on, what goes beyond technology, and I want to talk about one specific example. I think when you look at the most sophisticated campaigns that have leveraged disinformation, and we're talking about actors who were willingly doing this, there's still a lot that we don't know. So back to the Russian example, for instance, which is largely seen as the best documented campaign, right, on which the platforms have shared a lot of data. I have myself worked with the Senate Select Intelligence Committee to document what happened. There's still essential pieces of that campaign that we know nothing about and on which there's no data in the eye of the public to really understand how that technology was leveraged to manipulate audiences. Direct messages and how the Russians used to target deliberately specific journalists to feed them sources. We don't know anything about the scale of how much of that was going on. Similarly, what the GRU was doing alongside the IRA is something that there's zero available data on. So I would go back to those important and large-scale campaigns that we know have really disrupted society and interrogate, where are our blind spots? How can we do better? How can we produce this data so that we actually are able to fully understand those tactics? And then, of course, to build the tools to detect it, but also to train people to understand it and to build defenses.
Thank you. Dr. Farid, what are you going to tell your kid?
I fortunately don't have kids, so I don't have to struggle with this problem.
They're a blessing and a curse.
I think this is difficult because the fact is this generation is growing up on social media,
yes,
and they are not reading the Washington Post and the New York Times and MSNBC and Fox News. They think about information very differently. And I can tell you what I tell my students, which is do not confuse information with knowledge. Those are very different things. And I think there is this tendency that it's online, therefore it must be true. And so my job as an educator is to make you critically think about what you are reading. And I don't know how to do that on a sort of day-to-day basis, but I do that every day with my students, which is to critical reasoning. And with critical reasoning, I think everything comes. And if I may, I wanted to touch one, because I think you made a good point about the sort of the nuance between mis and disinformation. And we should acknowledge that there are going to be difficult calls. There is going to be content online that falls into this gray area that it's not clear what it is. But there is black and white things out there, and we should start dealing with that right now, and then we'll deal with that gray area when we need to. But let's not get confounded with that gray area and not deal with the real clear-cut harmful content.
Right, so information's not knowledge. I'd like to tell people in Congress, activity is not progress either. So I mean,
We agree on that.